Record. Okay, so good afternoon, folks, and thank you for tuning in to another Risk Institute online session. Today, we're fortunate to have with us the wonderful Mr. Adolphus Lye, our very own, to talk to us about his research on probabilistic prediction of material properties with artificial intelligence using PROMAP. So before we begin, I'd just like to make a few announcements about our upcoming talks. So on next week, 26th of April, 3 p.m, you have Professor Bilal M. Ayoub talking to us about hazard resilient infrastructure, including network topology and underground space as a case study, which sounds very exciting. And then the following week, we have Dr. Divya M. Pasuad, and she'll be talking to us about 2D and 3D imaging of planetary surfaces using remote data sets, and she'll be presenting from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And she's in California, so it's a slightly later talk. It'll be at 4:30 p.m. Then on the 10th of May, we have one of our alumni, Dr. Sarah. I'm not going to butcher her last name, so I won't try and pronounce it, but you can read it. And she'll be talking to us about the risks associated with dogs and resheltering them, and the model that they've created, which is the largest sample of dogs and their kind of risk to people. But she hasn't given us her title yet, so we'll get back to that soon. And Mr. Vladimir Stepanov, our very own as well, will be presenting to us. I haven't got a title from him yet, but he'll be presenting on the 17th of May at 2 p.m. So let me introduce our speaker. Mr. Adolphus Lye is currently a fourth-year PhD student based at the Institute for Risk and Uncertainty within the University of Liverpool. In 2018, he graduated from the National University of Singapore with a Bachelor of Science with honours majoring in physics and minoring in mathematics. In that same year, he obtained the Singapore Nuclear Research and Safety Initiatives Scholarship, which has funded his PhD study to date, and is co-supervised by Professor Eduardo Patelli and Professor Alice Cicerello. So thank you very much, Adolphus. Really pleased to have you with us today. If you'd like to start sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
Sure. Thank you so much, Francis, for your wonderful introduction. And thank you so much to all of you for making time to attend this talk this afternoon. And I will do my best to make sure that it's all worth it. Let me just hit the first slide. So once again, very good afternoon to everyone. I hope everyone had a very pleasant Easter break. And it brings me great pleasure to actually talk about this recent work that I just did titled Probabilistic Prediction of Material Properties with Artificial Intelligence, or PROMAP for short. It is a project that's co-supervised by Professor Nawaprinja, as well as my primary supervisor, Professor Patelli. And this work that I'm going to talk about is essentially a result of a 4-month feasibility study conducted between December last year up to the last day of March this year. And it is actually hosted by the Game Changers, the ANSIC group, the Advanced Nuclear Skills and Innovation Campus. And this is actually the work that we have actually submitted for this feasibility study challenge that we are going to discuss this afternoon. So this is what the presentation outline will be like this afternoon. I'll take off by actually talking about the motivation behind this project, followed by a brief overview as to what exactly this study is about and setting the context. And from which I will then discuss the research methodology that we have adopted in addressing the key problems that we will be talking about. And from which we will then look at the results, as well as some comments that I have over what the results actually mean, and just to give the meaning behind what we are seeing, before finally concluding this afternoon's discussion. So without further ado, let's kick things off. So in general, in the nuclear industry, it faces numerous challenges, of which the 3 of them I've listed as follows. The first of which is decommissioning of aging nuclear power plants, which have probably run its course. The second of which is the need to actually reduce the cost in building new plants. And the third is the issue of the sparsity of data. And why so? It's because it's usually expensive to actually run an experiment to actually generate data, and it also takes a lot of time. And this is why such issues actually persist. And from these challenges, it actually presents an opportunity for artificial intelligence to be implemented within the industry. And the role of the artificial intelligence technology can be split into two features. The first of which is decentralized decision-making or autonomous systems. And this is something like, Skynet in Terminator, where everything becomes self-aware and whatnot. And this is something, is the best. I actually like this point on that. And the second of which is a technical assistance, such as accident identification, system performance, information retrieval, structure integrity, and so forth, as listed in this slide. However, for this talk and in this research work that we are going to present, we'll be looking specifically at the application of AI in predicting material properties and behavior, as stated in bold. So this is the overview of our project, which is essentially to actually look into a review of the state of AI implementation in the nuclear industry. And through this survey that we did in our study, we found that the AI technology is not currently being widely implemented within industry. And in fact, the nuclear industry is lagging behind in this Industry 4.0 revolution compared to other industries such as the automobile and the medical industry. And in order to actually perform this study, we need actual data from to actually get this feasibility study up and running. And we are so fortunate to have the following data from NIMS and INSIFA, the following data for the creep rupture properties prediction, which includes 8,005 observations, the tensor properties prediction data, which includes 2,878 observations, the hardness property data, 234 observations, and finally, the cycles to failure prediction, 198 observations. And as I mentioned earlier, in one of the challenges is actually dealing with uncertainty and sparse data. And one of the key highlights of Project PROMAP is essentially the combination of AI with probabilistic methods, to which details I will go through in subsequent slides. And for this work, the main focus will be on creep rupture properties prediction and tensor properties prediction of the steels that we are going to be analyzing in this study. So these are the key input and output features that have been identified in previous sensitivity analysis study for creep rupture prediction and tensor property predictions. So in essence, in summary, for the creep rupture prediction, we have 23 input features and 3 key output features. Whereas for tensor properties prediction, we have, I think, 22 input features and 4 output features that are involved. So the details to each of these features are stated in this table, you can see from here. And just to give an illustration as to how the data actually looks like. So I present to you the scatter plot diagram of the creep rupture property data, as well as the tensor property data. And you can see that the scatter plots show some very interesting features, interesting characteristics, which I will talk about in the next slide. So allow me to actually talk about the research methodology that is involved in Project PROMAP. It involves 3 key steps. So the first of which is the data set enhancement. The second of which is the training of the artificial neural networks. And finally, the third step, the merging of the artificial intelligence tools with uncertainty quantification techniques. So each of these steps will be go through in detail subsequent. So for a start, let's take a look at the first step, which is the data set enhancement step. So as you've seen earlier in the data that I've presented, the scatter plot diagrams that we've seen, it is evident that there's significant unevenness in the distribution of the data. And you can see that some data points are actually grouped around discrete values. As you can see, they don't really take continuous values. They are usually like clustered among like discrete points. So you can see that there are gaps in between. And which brings me to the third point. You can see that there's discontinuity, and you can see that there are gaps in between some of the groups. And this presents a need to actually enhance the data set, because if there are this missing information here, we will need to actually address them So this is what we are trying to do over here. So for the data enhancement, an approach will be to introduce noise to the data and generate synthetic data points. And we have to also be careful in doing so because this needs to be done whilst preserving the correlation between the output features and the input features, as well as the material classification, to ensure that the physics still makes sense. And this is what's being involved in this step. So for this study, we choose a particular class of material class type, and from the corresponding numerical data of the input and target features, we then classify each of these values based on their unique values. So the results you'll see is the diagram on the right, that you can see that each of these dots represent a unique value for a given material class type. And of course, in this study, we did not need to propagate the material composition because for a given material class type, these are fixed variables. So we do not need to actually propagate, but rather we only need to propagate the corresponding features as listed over here as an example. So as I mentioned earlier, if you want to do the stochastic enhancement of the data set, we need to make sure that the physics is still retained. Otherwise, the simulation would not make much sense. And how do we actually retain this physical relationship between the input and target features? It is by essentially accounting for the Pearson correlations between these variables. And by computing these correlations, subsequently, we then consider the associated uncertainty of each data point just to simulate the aleatory uncertainty due to measurements. And in this simulation, we consider only 1% variation. Of course, you can do 2, 3, 4, but at least in this study, we just deal with 1% variation. And from which we then generate a multivariate Gaussian distribution, setting up the, setting up the covariance matrix in a manner which accounts for not just the variation, but also the correlation, as I mentioned earlier. And from which we then generate 10,000 synthetic data points from the actual raw data points that we have before for the corresponding steel type. And just to show you the results for the creep rupture properties, this is the resulting synthetic data that we obtain. The ones in red crosses are the synthetic data, while the ones in blue circle are the experimental data. So for this given steel type that we use, there are initially 13 data points, and we've managed to generate 10,000 data points from these. So this is the results that you see. And we've also repeated the same process for the same steel type for the tensor properties data. So we managed to increase it from 8 data points to 10,000 data points. So this is the results as seen. So with that, we can now proceed to the second step in this research methodology, and that is the training of the artificial neural networks. So of course, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be using this, in this study, we'll be looking at the prediction of material creep rupture as well as tensile properties. And we actually have 4 different artificial neural networks constructed for each target feature. So essentially, this is to introduce the element of model uncertainty to the problem. So because we want to loosen the assumption that there's only one model to actually describe this the physics between the input and the output features. And this is why we actually introduce multiple models per prediction of each output feature. And each of these artificial neural networks, of course, we have configured it in such a way that they have the corresponding number of input nodes, but only one output node, and in between with different number of hidden layers and nodes. And so one output node meaning to say that this ANN will only predict one of each output feature. So that's essentially what we are talking about over here. And we'll be calibrating the neural network using the feed-forward method, using the rectified linear unit activation function. And to calibrate the artificial neural network, we'll be using the synthetic data that we just generated in the previous step. And then from which we'll be using the experimental data to validate the results of the ANN prediction. And to quantify how good the validation and the calibration is, we'll be using this matrix known as the R-square score, and to actually look at how good our training is. So this is essentially the idea behind this step. And just for our information, these are the time taken to actually the training times for the corresponding configurations for each of the corresponding target feature that we're trying to predict. The ones that I've noted in star are the ones that have already previously been constructed in a previous study. So we'll just be actually including these, but just adding on, another 3 more artificial neural networks for each of the target features that we're going to predict. So this is essentially the results of the time. And this is the R-square score if you were to actually compare the observed output from the raw data versus the model prediction from the ANN. And for the information, the formula to compute the R-square is as follows, where yi is the data, the data itself, and y hat is the model prediction, and y bar is the mean. And we compute it in percentage, so just multiply by 100%. And you can see that most of which, are generally at a very high value of 99%. And I think the lowest is probably about 92.91%, 92 point. Yeah, so about this value, which essentially a pretty strong result that we are pleased to actually see. In addition, we've also computed the score, in comparison between the model prediction as well as the synthetic data output, just to look at how good the training is. And we can see that they're all also they all take a very high value of at least 92.16%, most of which in 99% region, which is also a very strong result that we are hoping to see. And a very interesting result that I'd like to show you is this, and what essentially this means is as follows. So in the prediction of the ultimate tensile strength, or UTS, which is I think in a unit of megapascal, we actually have the raw data that's in blue, and you can see that there's a spike in the blue. And one of the reasons behind it is possibly due to the error in the recording of the measurement, because as you know, these data are actually obtained directly from an industry, and that could be potentially, what we actually figured out is that there probably was an extra 0 in this in the recording of the corresponding data that's represented by this spike. But however, in when training ANN, and from there, actually looking at the prediction in relative to the observed data, you can see that the ANN is actually able to sort of bypass this error and is still able to sort of not account for this big jump anomaly, as you can see over here, which is a very interesting result, and it's something that we're actually hoping to see in the ANN prediction. However, while this result might be good in this case, but you have to bear in mind that this is only one anomaly. But if let's say you have multiple anomalies of up to like 5, 6, 7, then of course this result might be very different. So of course this needs to be studied. But at least in this case, we have something that looks pretty decent, and it's something that we are actually pleasantly surprised with. So this is just for us to keep in mind. And last but not least, we've reached to the final step, and that is the main gist of this feasibility study, which is the merger of the artificial neural network algorithm with the UQ tools. So how is this going to be done? So we'll be using this algorithm that has been previously developed in the Research Smart project, to which the citation can be found at the bottom of this slide, and known as the adaptive Bayesian model selection algorithm. And essentially, this method seeks to, given a set of artificial neural networks, it is able to provide a confidence bound on the prediction output, and also allows the corresponding aleatory and epistemic uncertainties associated with the input feature as well as the data to be propagated and quantified accordingly. So the adaptive Bayesian model, in the adaptive Bayesian model selection, what is the mathematics behind this method? Well, it is essentially, first of all, based on the Bayes' theorem, as its name suggests. So how it works is as follows. Given a set of artificial neural net models, let's say NM of them, for a given VIF and an ANN model with the training data x1, y1 to xn data, yn data, where x is the input feature and y is the output feature, its model posterior, whose expression is as shown over here, can be defined by the following equation as seen over here. So I'm sure most of us will have been familiar with this equation, but just allow me to go through, revise this with all of us again. So this term over here is the prior. So essentially, the prior of the choice of the model as well as the model prediction. And this term over here is likelihood. And the denominator is essentially the normalizing constant. And this term over here is the model posterior, as I mentioned earlier, where the y is essentially the prediction plus the error term, which is used to usually express how the data, the observed data, would be in comparison to the model prediction, where this epsilon is the error term that is usually assumed to be a zero mean normal distribution with a standard deviation sigma v in this case. And the interpretation of this posterior is as follows. The higher this value of the posterior, the more reliable the output YV from the model MV. So this is essentially what the idea is about. So what are the quantities, the key quantities that this algorithm seeks to actually compute? There are two. The first of which is the robust prediction, that's YRB, and the corresponding 95% confidence interval, which I will talk about in this slide. So first of which, to compute the robust prediction, first of all, it needs to actually identify the best model prediction, Y star. And Y star is essentially expressed as one in which the corresponding model whose output yields the highest value of the posterior. And from there, the robust prediction, YRB, is computed using this formula, Y star plus the weighted sum of the difference between the corresponding model output and the best model prediction. So this is essentially how it's being computed. And from which the corresponding 95% confidence interval on the robust prediction, which I use this expression to express it, you first need to actually compute the standard deviation term, which I call it phi, which is the weighted sum of the square difference between the model output and the robust prediction value. And from which the interval bounds are computed by just taking the robust prediction minus plus 1.95 of the standard deviation term. So this is just a brief summary of the mathematics. And for more information, please feel free to refer to this citation, this reference that I've put on this footnote of this slide. So this is a setup that we'll be adopting for our case study. So initially, in this work, we will assume a priori that all models are equally likely. And as such, we set the prior to follow a uniform distribution. So if you remember that we actually are able to generate, I think, 5 ANNs for each target feature. So essentially, we give it a priori probability of 1/5 each. So that will be the prior setup. And we'll be using a Gaussian mixture model to actually approximate the posterior distribution in the algorithm. And we'll be using the syntactic data once again that's being generated in step 2 to train this set of ANNs. And from there, we will then validate this probabilistic output of the results with the experimental data. So this is essentially how it's going to go. And this is the results that we are excited to actually show you this afternoon. So this is the what you get for the creep rupture prediction results. So just go through the red lines that you see are the 95% confidence bounds. The dotted line are your robust prediction, the YRBs, and the blue dots are your experimental data. So this is the what you see in comparison to the probabilistic prediction. So this one is quite tight in this case, and I'll actually explain why in the subsequent slide as to why this is so. So, but what I want to actually point out is that in general, you can see that the experimental data more or less are captured within this 95% confidence bounds. And in addition, in this case, the robust prediction also more or less agrees with the true experimental data, which is used to validate the results. And here I have the results for the tensor property prediction. So you can see that for each of these target features, of course, the bounds is slightly bigger in this case, but in general, you can see that the robust predictions more or less agree with the experiment data as well, and these experiment data are also captured within the bounds. However, for the last two, the elongation and the reduction of error prediction, you can see that while the robust predictions do not necessarily agree as much compared to the other prediction, but they all more or less fall within the confidence bounds. I think the worst case scenario pretty much fall more or less on the bounds itself. So this is actually a very pretty decent, promising result from the ABMS method. So this is quite nice to see. And for those who are interested, this is the computational time by the ABMS algorithm. So you can see that for the creep rupture, I think it on average takes about 2 to 3 times the time taken compared to the time taken to actually run the algorithm to predict the tensor properties, as you can see over here. So allow me to actually discuss the results that we have seen in the previous slides. So the 95% confidence interval, we have seen that the 95% confidence intervals computed by the ABMS algorithm generally includes encompasses and envelopes the experiment data for all target features, as I mentioned earlier. And why is this kind of like achieved and also expected? Is because of the, if you remember in the first step, when we generate the synthetic data actually envelopes the data regions that as if you remember the image as we have seen in the earlier slide. And when this is achieved, when the synthetic data is actually one that actually includes the data regions, it allows for the synthetic data to actually account for the regions that are actually represented by these experimental data. And this allows the information that was initially accounted for by experimental data to actually be accounted for in the artificial neural network and itself. So therefore, we expect that the ABMS algorithm to actually sort of, be well validated against the experimental data, as we have seen earlier. And the third point of which to discuss is at the target features for elongation and the RA for and reduction of error for the tensor properties. If you see the previous image has actually larger bounds compared to the other results that you've seen for the other target features. And why is this bound slightly larger for these two in particular? This is because the worst, or rather the lowest R-square score for these target features, for the which we have seen in the tensor properties, is the lowest of all compared to the other target features that we have seen in this table of R-square score that we saw in the earlier slides. And because of which, of course, the prediction would not be as strong compared to those that are of, let's say, 99% or 98%. Because if you remember, for these two worst predictions, the R-square score was about 92% for these two features. So this is exactly why the results are as such. And the competition time of the ABMS is generally longer for the case of predicting the creep rupture and the tensor properties, because for the cryptographic properties, there were 13 experimental data for the given steel type, whereas for tensor properties, for the same steel type, there's only 8 experimental data. And therefore, because the cryptography has slightly more data, it'll take slightly more time to actually do the computation and the validation by the algorithm itself. So this is essentially what we have. So to sort of conclude this afternoon's discussion, allow me to first talk about the extension of this work that we are actually currently in the midst of doing. So this extension that I'm actually working on, this extension of this research I'm working on, essentially can be framed as an inverse problem with interval output. So what do I mean by that? It's as follows. So let's consider for we have a model that yields an output interval of the prediction of the target feature. So consider an interval of a certain defined tolerance level. And given this output interval, we seek to actually determine what is the corresponding interval input that gives rise to this interval output. And as such, we address this as an inverse problem, which we can actually look into using the following tools, such as the interval neural network (INN) or the interval predictor model (IPM), to which details to these two algorithms can be found in the following references, as I show in the footnote below. So to summarize what we are seeing this afternoon, we have looked into the framework of integrating AI with probabilistic approaches. And the benefit of such approach will be that it allows for the uncertainties to be accounted for. And by uncertainties, I mean those due to the lack of input data, as well as the model uncertainty. And second of which is that the second benefit of which this method actually provides is that it enables one to actually obtain a robust prediction with a quantifiable confidence interval. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, by being able to actually deal with this with bypass the sparse data issued by generating synthetic data, it actually helps to actually reduce the cost from having to run a large number of experiment campaigns. And in fact, from a technical report that I was actually reading in the midst of undergoing this study, we found that at least for the fracture experimental campaign, it costs about 15,000 quid per campaign. And I'm not joking. I'm not putting extra zero there by accident. It is the number that's been reported in the report. So this is essentially, one of the key benefits of what this study can actually, give to the industry. And following which, we will also be we have also undertaken some publication and outreach initiatives. And the first of which is the An6 Showcase, which was conducted on the 30th of March. And this is the photo, as you can see, it was taken on the event itself. And the poster for this on this Project PROMAP is actually now available on my ResearchGate platform. And we're also in the midst of writing a conference paper on this for SROL 2022, which will be held on 30th August 2022 in Dublin, Ireland, and is currently in the midst of writing. And finally, because we want to make this accessible and transparent, we will also be setting up a GitHub repository of the data and codes that's being used to actually produce this result, so that everyone can actually have a go and to replicate the results that we have just seen, as well as to appreciate this methodology that we've just talked about this afternoon. So in closing, I'd like to, on behalf of the authors who have participated in this feasibility study, to express our deepest gratitude to the following groups: the National Institute for Material Science and the NCFA for providing the necessary data for this study; the Advanced Nuclear Skills and Innovation Campus, ANSIC, for the support of this feasibility study; and finally, a shout out to my funders, the Singapore Nuclear Research and Safety Initiatives, for supporting my PhD study after all these years. And with that, I'd like to close off by sharing my contact details, which you can use to actually contact me if you have any questions on the research that I'm actually undertaking. And with that, I thank you all so much for your undivided attention.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adolphus. Really clear, concise presentation. And yeah, fantastic. Looks like you've done so much work. So really impressive. Do
Thank
we
you,
have any
Francis.
questions from the audience? I see that Alex has his hand raised.
Hey, yeah, thanks very much for the presentation, Adolphus. I've got all sorts of questions. I think a lot of it is just stemming from, I don't know, like just red lights flash whenever anyone says confidence intervals at the moment. But
Oh,
basically, just obviously a lot of this approach is reliant on assumptions of normality and things, and just like, have you got any assessments of the robustness to those kind of assumptions in training the neural network?
as in,
As the first question, and then the second one was just about the confidence intervals, the confidence bounds that provided for the output features and some of the data sets. I can't remember the slide number. It was towards the end. It was the one that showed the really good.
let's just get back to that.
Yeah. These.
Yeah.
So there's how many plots are there
So
over the 3 slides?
yeah, so I think for the first, that is the this is for creep rupture prediction. There were 13 experimental data points for that particular steel type. So here there are 13. And then for the tensor properties prediction, there were 8 of these experimental data for the that corresponding steel type.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think, because obviously that 95% confidence bound looks like that's a conservative estimate, because you would expect some of those points to be falling outside of those bounds given the number of points that are being shown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so allow me to actually first address the first question. I think you were asking about our assumption of the normal Gaussian error. Now, of course, for this study, because it was only a 3-4 months study. In fact, actually it was less than 4 months because there was a Christmas break and the data also came late. So we only had this study was shortened unofficially to like 2-3 months. But I think for this study, because I think also because of time constraint, we actually decided to work on the more simpler assumption of a Gaussian what you call measurement error.
Yeah.
Of course, that might not necessarily be the case. And you can also what you call extend this research by considering other kinds of error, like for example exponential distribution, a log normal, or or maybe even a Weibull distribution if you would actually love to try, and just look at how the the synthetic data would actually the resulting synthetic data would look like in comparison to the actual raw data. So we haven't really done this what you call a comparison because we didn't even actually try other kinds of error distribution to begin with. But that definitely can be a consideration. In fact, thank you so much for raising this. It could be definitely a consideration for a further a further study to see with the type of the error will actually have an impact on the robustness of the prediction, as well as the how the synthetic data will actually look like, the profile of the synthetic data will actually look like in comparison to the the raw data that we are interested in. Now, to your second question, of course, I think what you say that was that this 95% confidence bounds might be a what you call a conservative kind of like estimate. Of course, like if based on my understanding of this algorithm, because I myself am also quite new to this method, these bounds were actually what you call are actually subjected to the the set of artificial neural networks that you have. So for each artificial network, of course, we're going to have different kinds of what you call predicted values, and because it only accounts for the what you call the set of ANNs that you train for this adaptive Bayesian model selection algorithm. Therefore, you expect that the worst case to actually correspond to the worst case prediction among the set of artificial neural network models that you have used in as the input model sets. So, which is why I think in this case, if my understanding is correct, and this is why you find that the model, I mean, rather the worst case predicted estimates actually lie exactly on the 95% confidence bounds itself. This is my answer as of now, but I will definitely try to read up more about it and get back to you with a more satisfactory answer. But like I said, thank you so much for raising this. It's definitely it's a fruitful thought.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, just as a closing note, on the note of looking at tolerance intervals on an output and how that relates to corresponding levels on inputs, there might be some interesting things I might be able to say about that soon. So like once I've sorted that out, I can get in touch and let you know.
Sure, thank you so much. Like please feel free to like just contact me if you have any light bulb that just lights up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex, for your question. Can I ask, what do you think the difference would be if you were using an interval neural network instead? Do you think the results would be significantly different in any way, or would it kind of just be more of what you've presented today?
That's a very good question. In fact, I'm not too sure if you were to use what would be like if you were to use the artificial interval neural network. Do you mean if I use the interval neural network in place of the artificial neural networks?
Right. Yeah, exactly. How would that influence the results, do you think?
I can't say for sure that I know the answer to this, but in fact, I'm not even too sure if the INN could be used in the adaptive Bayesian model selection, because in the ABMS, normally, the models that we have are ones that generate one input and one output from a set of inputs. So if you were to put an interval neural network, unfortunately, I'm not too sure how this would actually work for the ABMS, but I'm not going to say it won't work for sure, but it's definitely something that I will look into it, because at this point in time, I do not have the answer to this question. But
yeah, no, of course. I was curious myself because I haven't seen it used before, so I wanted to know how that might influence.
But however, just want to add in. However, we can actually use the interval neural network to actually train this INN with the synthetic data, and then look at the bounds in which it predicts compared to the experimental data. And then you can actually do later a comparison between the bounds that are obtained by this method, the interval neural network, versus the one that's obtained by the adaptive Bayesian model selection. And then you can do a comparison from there and see which is perhaps better or more conservative.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, actually.
Indeed.
Definitely. Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience at all?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Again, thanks for your talk. It was really interesting, and I do have a few simple questions. So, do you use the simple feed-forward architecture in your neural network?
Sorry, a simple what?
Feed-forward
yes.
architecture.
I did use a simple feed-forward architecture in this case.
And this is not something like LSTM or just nothing is related to memory, right?
Oh no, not in this case.
Mm-hmm. And just if you can go to slide 25, please.
25. All right, no problem.
Yeah, just to understand what you're showing. So you take a picture on the top left. So number one means you're taking certain inputs and you predict it. So your P as 0 to value. And then you take another set of inputs and then you predict data point number 2. Or is it right?
Is it, sorry?
So I'm trying to understand. So point number 1 and 2 on your plot.
Yeah.
Are they connected somehow, or the difference is just two different inputs for the data set?
Oh yeah, they're not connected at all. They're just like this data set number 1, data set number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. and I just like
Okay,
plot them.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. No.
Entry
And
number
this
1,
is-
2, 3.
Yeah, it's basically something similar like multivariate regression model,
Mhm.
right? So you showed us in the beginning of the presentation this correlation coefficients from the inputs, and then you choose only those inputs which correlate with your output, and then you basically do regression, maybe non-linear. How many layers do you have in your?
Okay, so how many layers do I have in my neural network? Is that what
Yeah.
you're asking? Yeah, okay, let me just proceed to the table. Yeah, so these are the ones that I have. So we are looking at 1, 2, and 3 different 3 hidden layers. So 1, 2, and 3 hidden layers. Yeah, so that's what we have.
Yeah, and just maybe a small comment in your formula for when you compute your confidence intervals, you're using constant 1.95.
Yes.
So, and this of course just if your number of inputs are much more than 100. So basically, this is not right when you do have a small amount of points. When you're assuming a normality condition.
Yeah.
This can make some difference in your outputs. Please keep in mind this.
Possibly. Thank you so much for raising this.
Yeah, and actually we can talk maybe later in person about these 2 papers which you mentioned in the end by Marco and other guys.
This one?
Yeah, these 2 papers. Yeah, we can talk later. Yeah,
No
I can email you and we can meet.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cosmo, for your question. I think we have time for a few more questions if anyone has any.
You know, I'm going to regret asking this question because it belies the fact that I haven't understood this at all. So at the end, when you said thank you for your undivided attention, I it's not been undivided. A bird flew by my window. So I am really confused, but it was at the beginning. My confusion was at the beginning because you were talking about those data sets that had, 4,000, 8,000 samples, right? And then suddenly, and I turned around and you were talking about generating the synthetic data, 10,000 samples, but based on 8 samples.
Okay.
So could you tell me what happened when I wasn't paying attention? What happened to all the data that you had? And then
I'm going to explain to you what happened in between.
Okay.
Thank you so much for actually asking this. Okay, just allow me to sort of way back up. So the answer lies in slide number 9. So essentially, from this many data set, in this study that because in the interest of this time scale of this feasibility study, we actually chose to look into a simple case where we only consider one particular cast type of steel. Because earlier on we have 4,000 plus, 2,000 plus data because we consider all the different cast type of steels. But for this feasibility study, we decided to just create a simple what you call framework where we only consider one material cast type, and therefore, because for that particular cast type, there's like only 13 and experiment data, and for creep rupture, and 8 for the tensor data prediction. So just to like simulate that, given the limited data set for this particular steel type, we decide to actually from there what you call apply the data generating method that we were talking about. So that's how we actually later on for the creep rupture we increased from 13 to 10,000, and for tensile we increased from 8 to 10,000. But these are just only for the prediction of the properties for a given steel type. That's it.
And you preserved correlations.
And we preserve correlations, yeah.
But correlations are an imperfect model of dependence. So, and of course, with 8 or 13 points, it's really hard to see
Yeah.
what the dependence really is. Okay. Well, well, thanks. That's helpful. It was slide 10 when I realized I didn't know what was happening.
No worries.
So it was slide 9 that was the problem. Thanks.
No worries. So Professor Scott, just to add on also to the comment of using correlation, we acknowledge that I'm glad you raised this, that it's an imperfect way to actually model the relation, but also because of the fact I didn't actually say this earlier, but we were not provided with any physical models to look at the relationship between the numerous features. So we only have this correlation to be the one, probably however good it is, as a way to to talk about the physics between each of the variables. So
it's the best you can do, you're saying,
given the fact that we actually not given any models.
Yeah. Thanks.
No worries.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any more questions from the audience before we wrap up? And if not, let's thank our speaker again. So thank you very much, Adolphus. Really wonderful talk. Great to have you here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Can you just remind us how people can follow your work? I know you had something on the last slide, your
yes.
virtual business card, but just for the people that are catching the presentation at the end, if they are catching on YouTube or anything like that.
You can scan the QR code. It takes you directly to my website.
Fancy.
So in fact, if you just scan my QR code, that's enough, because with my website, it will take you to this homepage, and you can just go to the Reach Me tab, where every single platform that you can reach me via can be found over here.
Wow, very helpful. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, sorry, Scott.
No carrier pigeon.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Adolphus, and thank you for all those that are tuning in, and hopefully see you next week for our next talk. So have a lovely afternoon and see you all soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.